talking about the skill of listening and the art of listening and how people improve their communication when they're being listened to. And that came from, like, for the very first time when I was 29, really feeling, as I was talking to a Tibetan Buddhist monk who I couldn't explain to the lads what he was doing, but I just felt how I actually felt. It wasn't that I noticed that he was listening very intently. It was that my communication had become exceptionally skillful and clear and precise. And I was like, wow, where's that coming from? That's usually a little bit more, particularly, when you're struggling, it's a little bit more, could be. But this was just like, and then I looked at him and I could see his entire being was like resting on my every word. And I was like, wow, there's a much greater dance there than I would have realized. And so
would you mind just touching on that, even that experience with the Tibetan monk that you mentioned, and just the very clear experience of, wow, how that person is listening is almost, it's engaging with how I'm speaking, or the clarity with which I'm speaking.
I don't know what, like, I suppose he drew me in some respects to the conversation over a ginger coffee, and myself and Sergio, the fellow who I was traveling with, were sitting in conversation with him, and he started telling this story, and he was telling one of his Eastern fables, or whatever journey he went to with whatever Guruji he was working with, and he said something like he went up to Chiang Mai, maybe in the north of Thailand. We were in the south, about 2 hours south of Bangkok, and he went up to Chiang Mai, and Sergio was totally blown away by the man, and he was like, wow, and you went up, you walked through the forest and across the land the whole way, and assuming this ascetic nature. And the monk just looked at him and kind of started to smile and said, no, Sergio, I flew. We're allowed to fly, like, so the two of us started laughing, and you could see that that lovely humor and the lightness. And it's so important to see that, isn't it? Because sometimes so much of the spirituality can be a little bit heavy and a little bit like serious, and so just that lightness, I suppose, drew me in a way. And then also for him to speak, like, he spoke to me very directly about, it's like, go home, take this home, take what you've learned here home, and if it's of any value to anybody, then just share it with them, or see where it meets your own culture and see where it meets your own spiritual history and see where those things can interweave. That's what you want to do, like, in Buddhist way, Christian way, whatever way, it doesn't matter. It's just like, if there's value in this, share it. And that was really the first time I'd heard, or was able to hear, maybe, but what I felt at the time was the first time I'd heard somebody handling a spiritual doctrine saying, maybe some of this, maybe some of that, maybe bring that in, maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. But if it's valuable, it's valuable. And there's no two ways about that. Value is value, healing is healing. And I found that to be a very disarming kind of a lightness that came with it. So I suppose there was two big things that he'd already hit me with. And then I suppose he asked me for my story. And I can remember, those moments where you come into the moment, you come into the reality very viscerally and very clearly, to the point where I can see it now as if I can see where I'm sitting, I can see my orientation, I can see where Sergio is, I can see where the monk is, I can feel the packet of biscuits on the table, like the ginger coffee, I can smell the coffee, it's a very rich memory. And what elicited the memory was just that feeling of noticing my own articulation. And maybe that was coming out of the back of a long period of struggle, I don't know, where I was in that uncertainty. And so you're second guessing, or I was second guessing everything that I was saying, and didn't feel clear and wasn't coming from a center point. And now I was in a position where I was meditating every day and I was practicing yoga and I was tuned, and all of a sudden, maybe in that moment with him, something came online that hadn't been online. That might be a possibility too, Mark, I'm not sure. But I remember thinking at the time, wow, whatever's going on in me is being impacted by him. There's something happening here between the two of us that I don't ever remember feeling this before or noticing this before. Like, it was just a greater clarity. Now, it's like, when you're on the field, they say as soon as you realize you're in the flow, you're out of the flow. And there was a little bit of that maybe going on, like I was in it, and then all of a sudden I was noticing I was in it, which meant I was out of it in some regard. But it was the generosity of spirit. I really, maybe I tend to overgive. I do tend to overgive at times, and so I equate that in some ways to generosity of spirit. And I meet generosity of spirit in people more and more now in my life, and I find it to be it's almost like if somebody has it, I I feel I can work with them. Like I have business with them in some way. And if they don't have it, so it's like almost like a dividing line now. And that's not to say they write people off who don't have it, or don't want to engage with people who don't have it. There's a variety of different, we go through different periods where we don't have it. But generosity of spirit, I'm so attracted to it, I suppose. And I guess that's what this man was showing me. He was showing me a great generosity of spirit, that I'm committed to what you're saying. I'm in. I'm not thinking about what I want to say next. I'm not trying to teach you some, take what your words are and turn them into some parable from the East, or tell you of why we're better here than ye are over there, or anything like that. He was just listening. He was just listening. He was fully in it, and he was so fully in it that I noticed how fully in it he was. I think otherwise, when you're talking, sometimes you're not quite aware of those things. But I mean, it was certainly, it was a lesson. It was a lesson.